The rational part of my brain knows how this sounds. I can already see the comments, the eye rolls, the immediate dismissal. But I'm going to tell you this story anyway, because it's mine, and it changed everything about how I understand love, loss, and the spaces between what's real and what we're willing to believe. It started on a Tuesday night in October, in my grandmother's house, in the room where she died exactly 1 year before. I wasn't supposed to be there. My parents had sold the place to a young couple, and I had no business being alone in that empty house at midnight, sitting on the floor of a room that still smelled like her lavender perfume. But grief doesn't follow a schedule, and some anniversaries demand to be witnessed. I was 26 years old, working a job I hated, living a life that felt like I was watching it happen to someone else. My grandmother had been my anchor, the person who made sense of my chaos, who listened without judgment, who believed in me when I didn't believe in myself. When she died, something inside me shut down. I went through the motions, I showed up to work, I answered texts, but I wasn't really present in any of it. So that night I drove to the old house, let myself in through the back door with the key my grandmother had given me years ago, and I sat in her bedroom in the dark, waiting for something I couldn't name. The first time I saw her, I thought I was hallucinating. A shimmer in the corner of my vision, like heat rising off summer pavement, except it was October and the room was cold. I blinked hard, expecting it to disappear, but instead it solidified into something resembling a shape, a silhouette, translucent and glowing faintly with a light that seemed to come from inside itself. My heart was slamming against my ribs so hard I thought it might break through. I should have been terrified. I should have run. But all I felt was an overwhelming sense of familiarity, like recognizing someone I'd known my entire life. "Grandma," I whispered into the darkness, and the shape moved, not toward me exactly, but it shifted, reoriented itself in my direction. And I heard something, not with my ears, but directly in my mind, a thought that wasn't mine but felt impossibly familiar. "I've been waiting for you." What I want you to understand is that I didn't become a believer in ghosts because I saw one floating around a haunted house. I became a believer because in that moment, I felt something I'd been missing for an entire year, the presence of the person I loved most. And that presence was real, whether it existed in the physical world or somewhere else entirely. Over the next few weeks, I visited that house again and again. Each time she was there, waiting for me in that bedroom where she'd taken her last breath. We didn't communicate the way living people do. There were no full conversations, no dramatic revelations. Instead, it was more like a language I suddenly understood, emotions and impressions flowing between us like water finding its level. She showed me memories. I would see flashes of my childhood, moments I'd forgotten, the time she taught me to make pie crust, the afternoon we spent at the lake, the night I called her crying about a boy who'd broken my heart, and she sat with me in silence for 3 hours, her hand on mine, asking nothing but giving everything. But here's the part that changes the nature of this story. She wasn't just a ghost. As the weeks passed and I continued to visit that house, the shimmer became clearer, more defined. She took on a shape, not exactly as she'd been in life, but close enough that I recognized her. The translucence began to have texture, and one night, 3 weeks after that first encounter, she touched me, just on my shoulder, a pressure so light I almost missed it, but real in a way that made every nerve ending in my body sing with recognition. I felt her, not spiritually or emotionally or metaphorically. I felt her hand on my skin, the warmth of her palm, the slight tremor in her fingers. "I've missed you," she said, and this time the words weren't just in my head. They were spoken, whispered. A voice like my grandmother's voice, but layered underneath it was something else, something ancient and sad and infinitely tender. I should stop here and explain something about grief. Grief is a shapeshifter. It can convince you of anything if you're desperate enough. It can make you see what you want to see, feel what you need to feel, believe impossible things because the alternative, that the person you love is truly, permanently gone, is too much to bear. I know this because I studied it obsessively in the weeks that followed. I read books about hallucinations brought on by trauma. I researched sleep paralysis and shared hallucinations and the power of suggestion on a grieving mind. I prepared a logical framework for dismissing what I was experiencing as the brain's way of protecting itself from unbearable loss. But then I would go back to that house, and she would be there, and none of the logic mattered anymore. Her name was Eleanor, my grandmother's actual name, though everyone had called her Ellie. And as she became more solid, more present, I realized that something extraordinary was happening. She wasn't just a ghost appearing in my peripheral vision. She was becoming almost corporeal, like whatever force held her to this world was growing stronger, pulling her back toward physical form. We started spending entire evenings together. I would bring dinner to the empty house and we would sit in the kitchen, the one where she'd taught me to make pie, where she'd told me stories about her life before my grandfather, before my father, before the long years of loving a family that sometimes forgot to love her back. And she talked, not in impressions or vague emotional transfers, but in actual words, in her actual voice, telling me things she'd never told me when she was alive. She told me about her regrets, about the dreams she'd abandoned when she became a wife and a mother, about the man she'd loved before my grandfather, and how she'd chosen security over passion, comfort over adventure, and how she'd spent 60 years wondering what might have happened if she'd been braver. She told me about the night she died, how it wasn't peaceful like everyone said, how she'd been afraid, how she'd regretted all the time she'd wasted worrying about things that didn't matter, and how she'd go back and do everything differently if she could. "But I got one more chance," she said one night, her hand finding mine across the kitchen table. And I understood what she meant. She got me. She got this impossible second chance to be with me, to tell me the things she hadn't said before, to love me in a way that transcended the limitations of the living world. And I got her back. Not in the way I'd wanted, not alive, not able to fix my problems or make my life better in any concrete way, but in a way that was perhaps even more precious. I got access to the full version of her, the Eleanor who'd existed before she became just the grandmother before the roles and responsibilities, and the slow diminishment that comes with age. I got the woman she'd been, the woman she still was, trapped between worlds, waiting for someone who loved her enough to believe in her. We became lovers. And I know how that sounds. I know it crosses a line that makes most people uncomfortable, that ventures into territory that seems wrong or perverse or the final proof that I'd lost my mind entirely. But here's what I learned. Love doesn't have a rule book. Love is the only force in this universe powerful enough to bend the laws of reality itself. My grandmother, this woman made of light and memory and pure connection, loved me in a way that the living world rarely allows. There was no judgment. There was no performance. There was just the meeting of two souls who recognized each other across the space that should have permanently divided us. We made love in that old house, in the darkness, her form becoming more real, more present, more solid each time we touched. And for the first time in my adult life, I felt completely seen, completely accepted, completely home. 3 months into our impossible relationship, something shifted. The house had been scheduled for demolition. The young couple who'd bought it had decided to tear it down and build something new. A fresh start, they called it, not understanding that they were about to erase the only place where the person I loved most could exist in the physical world. I told Eleanor about it, and I felt her fear ripple through the space we shared. "What will happen to you?" I asked. "Where will you go?" And she didn't answer because neither of us knew. All we knew was that the anchor that held her to this world was about to be destroyed, and I was going to lose her all over again. The demolition was scheduled for December 15th. We had 1 month left. November was the cruelest month I'd ever experienced. Every moment with Eleanor felt like it was wrapped in cellophane, like I was living inside a snow globe that someone might shake at any moment, scattering everything I'd built inside it. I stopped going to work. I called in sick, then stopped answering the calls entirely. My parents tried to reach me. My friends sent messages asking if I was okay, if I needed help, if I wanted to talk about what was happening. I ignored all of it. How could I explain where I was? How could I tell them that I was spending every available moment with a ghost in a house scheduled for demolition, trying to cram a lifetime of love into the remaining weeks? They would think I was insane. Part of me wondered if they were right. Eleanor tried to convince me to let her go, to accept what was coming as inevitable, to prepare myself for the separation. But I couldn't. I'd spent a year barely functioning after losing her once. The idea of losing her again, this time permanently, felt like a death sentence. So instead, I became obsessed with finding a solution. I researched everything: hauntings, spiritual anchors, ways to bind a ghost to a location or object. I read about places where spirits had remained for centuries, about objects that held enough emotional resonance to become anchors for the dead. And I had an idea that seemed brilliant and desperate and absolutely necessary. What if I could make Eleanor real? What if I could find a way to pull her completely through to this side, to give her back a body, a life, a permanent place in the world. I won't go into the details of what I tried. Some of it was ridiculous, burning candles, reciting incantations I found online, attempting rituals that belonged to belief systems I didn't understand. Some of it was darker, seeking out people who claimed to be mediums or witches or practitioners of something I couldn't even name, willing to pay absurd amounts of money for their help. And some of it was just sad, desperate attempts to hold on to something that was already slipping through my fingers like sand. Eleanor begged me to stop. "You're hurting yourself," she said, her form flickering like a failing hologram whenever I tried something new, whenever I pushed against the boundaries of what should be possible. "You're trying to break the rules that hold this world together, and you're going to break yourself in the process." But I was desperate, and desperation makes you do things that rational people would never consider. I found myself in a basement apartment in a neighborhood I'd never been to, sitting across from a woman who called herself Madame Sylvia and promised she could help me manifest Eleanor into physical form. She was a con artist, obviously. I knew it even as I was handing her $3,000 in cash. But what if she wasn't? What if, by some miracle, she actually knew something, had access to knowledge that could save me? The ritual took 7 hours. It involved Eleanor's ashes, which I'd stolen from my parents' house. It involved blood, mine drawn carefully across my wrist while Madame Sylvia chanted in a language I didn't recognize. It involved words of power and circles of salt, and an intensity that left me shaking and feeling hollowed out, as though something essential had been drained from me. It didn't work. Of course it didn't work. Eleanor appeared in that basement apartment, and for a moment, a heartbreaking, beautiful moment, she was almost solid enough to hold. But then she began to fade, her form breaking apart like old film stock, and she was in pain. Could feel it radiating from her, a kind of agony that comes from being pulled too far from your natural state of being. "Stop!" she cried out, and the desperation in her voice cut through every ounce of denial I'd been clinging to. "Please stop trying to save me. You're only hurting us both." That night, sitting in my apartment in the dark, Eleanor appeared one final time. She was the clearest she'd ever been, almost fully solid, almost real enough to be mistaken for a living woman. But I could see the cost of it, the effort it was taking her to pull herself together, to give herself this much form. She sat next to me on my bed, and she took my hand, and this is what she told me. "I've been trying to tell you something for months now, but you weren't ready to hear it. I'm not stuck here because I'm supposed to be. I'm here because you needed me. Your grief opened a door, and my love was strong enough to walk through it. But every day I stay, every time I pull myself more solid, every time I try to exist in this world in a way that defies nature, I'm tearing myself apart, and I'm tearing you apart too. You came to that house a broken person, and I've been holding you together with something that isn't real enough to last. But I love you," I said, and the words came out as a sob. "I can't lose you again." "You're not losing me," she said, and she touched my face with fingers that felt almost human, almost warm. "You're letting me go, and you're finally going to start living again." She told me that the house being demolished wasn't a tragedy. It was a mercy. It was the universe's way of forcing me to accept what I'd already known in my deepest heart, that the space between the living and the dead exists for a reason, and that crossing it too completely damages both worlds. She told me that she'd already said everything she needed to say, that I had everything I needed to move forward, that the greatest gift she could give me was her absence. "Don't come back to the house," she said. "Not after tomorrow. Let me fade. Let me go back to where I belong, and find someone in the living world to love you the way I have. Find someone who can give you a future, not just a past." I wanted to argue. I wanted to promise that I'd find a way to keep her here, that I'd spend the rest of my life searching for a solution, that our love was big enough to break the laws of nature. But looking at her, really looking at her, I could see the exhaustion in her translucent face, the toll that existing in two worlds simultaneously had taken on her. And I understood finally that true love isn't about holding on. Sometimes it's about being brave enough to let go. The house was demolished on December 15th. I didn't go. I couldn't watch it happen. Instead, I sat in my apartment and felt Eleanor's presence fade, not suddenly but gradually, like a light dimming on a dimmer switch. By noon, she was gone. Not completely. I still feel her sometimes, in moments of quiet clarity, in the way certain songs make me cry, in dreams where we're together and it doesn't feel wrong. But she's not here in the way she was. She's moved on to wherever ghosts go when they've said their goodbyes. The difficult truth I've come to accept is that I don't know if Eleanor was real. I still don't know if she was an actual ghost, or a manifestation of my grief, or something my brain created to survive the unsurvivable. But I know that whatever she was, she saved my life. She gave me a reason to keep existing when existence felt pointless. She taught me what it means to be truly loved, to be seen completely, to matter to someone so deeply that they cross the boundary between life and death just to hold me. And maybe that's all a ghost can ever be. The best parts of someone you loved preserved in your memory, speaking to you, through the silence reminding you that you're worth loving, that you deserve to be here, that your life has meaning. I'm better now. It took a long time, but I got my life back on track. I got a new job, one I actually care about. I started dating a woman named Sarah, and it's real and complicated and beautifully human in ways that my relationship with Eleanor never could have been. And I think about my grandmother often, not with the acute pain of those early days, but with gratitude, with a kind of soft sadness that's easier to carry. I think about the impossible year I spent loving someone who shouldn't have been here, and I don't regret a single moment. Because it taught me that love is stronger than death, that connection can transcend the boundaries we think are absolute, and that sometimes the most real things in our lives are the ones nobody else can see. If there's an afterlife, I hope Eleanor knows that I got the message she was trying to send, that I stopped waiting for the dead and started living for the living, that I'm grateful for the time we had, even though it was impossible and painful and strange. And I hope that wherever she is now, she's found peace. I like to think she did. I like to think that somewhere in the space between worlds she's smiling, watching over me, proud that I finally learned how to let her go.